computer, plotting out and executing all the different burns and maneuvers necessary. They'll have equipment set up inside of the space station where they're going to be able to monitor that approach, and they are in the loop. So you have several different controls where the team in Hawthorne can send commands to the vehicle to make it manually break out abort if we run into any issues. But then Woody and Steve will also be enabled to send commands to Dragon as they're monitoring just if anything off nominal should happen. So they'll be set up and monitoring Dragon, which at this moment is closing in on about 3 kilometers in range of the space station. And again, its general approach is going to continue upward. We're heading to a point just 400 meters directly below the space station, and that's going to be waypoint 0. Before we get there, the teams here in Houston and in Hawthorne are doing joint go, no-go polls, essentially giving Dragon the go-ahead to proceed past waypoint 0 and move on to waypoint 1. That'll be a spot approximately 220 meters directly in front of the space station onto what's known as the docking axis. So again, since we're going to that forward port, we're going to be right in front of the space station, and this will put it not perfectly lined up, as we won't do that final alignment until we're a little bit closer, but essentially on that docking axis. So if you were to draw a straight line through the space station, straight through the center of that docking port in the forward end of node 2, that's the line where Dragon's going to be set up, and that'll be waypoint 1. And again, before we get to waypoint 1, we'll do another joint go, no-go poll, and the teams will actually give Dragon the go-ahead to proceed past waypoint 1 and then on to waypoint 2, and that'll be a spot just 20 meters in front of that docking port. Again, we have these different waypoints set up. Dragon can hold at these waypoints if we need it to, but if all the systems, all of the navigation hardware is performing as we expect, it'll just pass directly through these waypoints, won't take a minute to hold or anything like that, and we'll just proceed in with the docking. As mentioned, everything has been about 20 minutes ahead on the timeline right now, so we are expecting to be just about an hour and 6 minutes away from docking. So our target time is around the 6:28 a.m. Central Time frame, but we'll fine-tune that as we get a little bit closer in. After Dragon flies through waypoint 1, it's going to go up to waypoint 2, and before we get there, we'll do our final go, no-go for docking. So waypoint 2 will be a spot just 20 meters in front of the space station, and that's when since we're going to the forward port, we'll have a lot of cameras that are able to kind of lock on and watch Dragon on its final approach. We should also start getting a sunrise in about 6 minutes from now, and then you'll see things start to light up on the space station, and then we'll have several cameras from station trained down to track Dragon during its final approach. But waypoint 2, that's our final waypoint. That's just 20 meters in front of the station, and this is a good graphic to show you kind of where we've gone through already. So that approach initiation burn has already happened. That's when we're a little more than 7 kilometers behind the station and 2.5 below it, and that's what really starts to swing us up kind of into the neighborhood of the space station itself. There's one dot that's not on there, but it's the mid-course correction burn. That's coming up in about 7 minutes. That happens about halfway between approach initiation and waypoint 0, just to really converge Dragon's path to make sure we're going to hit that spot 400 meters directly below the station. In this, you can see two circular shapes. One, that approach ellipsoid, that is an oval shape, 3-dimensional shape though, 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, and that is one of the primary zones kind of governing vehicles coming and going from the space station. There's a set of rules involved with any spacecraft that's going to be entering into that space, and that's part of the go, no-go polls that happen prior to the approach initiation burn between the teams. Just again, we want to make sure that we have a healthy spacecraft on its way to the station. We want to make sure that all of the different systems on board the space station, motion control system, everything are functional before we bring in anything to try and link up with it. And then before that approach initiation burn, Dragon is on what's known as a 24-hour free safe trajectory, which means if we were to lose control of Dragon completely, lost all command, all thrusters, everything, we know that for at least 24 hours, its already established orbit would not cross inside of that ellipsoid. And so by giving the go to do that approach initiation burn, we're essentially breaking out of that and changing Dragon's orbit to bring it inside. The keep out sphere, similar rules, but that one we keep a spacecraft in what's known as a 4-orbit safe trajectory. So that tells you if kind of the same thing, if you were to lose complete control over Dragon, you know for at least 4 orbits or about 6 hours in time, Dragon would not come any closer than that keep out sphere, which has a radius of about 200 meters in all directions around the station itself. But right now we're about halfway up that line between the approach initiation and waypoint 0, standing by for the mid-course burn in about 5 minutes, and then we should hit waypoint 0 about 25 minutes from now, and that'll bring us just 400 meters directly beneath the space station, and we will have sunlight at that point, so we should be getting some good views of Dragon once it arrives directly below. And again, we're not going to pause at waypoint 0, we're going to continue on. And this is actually a view from Dragon itself, and we're looking up at the space station as it continues to approach. We're just a little over 2 kilometers away in distance. And again, we've got that mid-course burn coming up. Again, that mid-course burn coming up in about 4 minutes. That's going to just basically fine-tune our path up to the space station at waypoint 0. So this is a view from station looking down at Dragon. You can tell by the green and the red lights. We often get asked why the different colors. That's telling you basically the port and starboard side of the spacecraft. You always have to think in 3 dimensions whenever you're doing orbital maneuvers, so those lights just basically give us a very clear visual reference of which side of the vehicle that we're looking at. And that flashing light just an additional navigational aid. So we can't see it right now, but we're actually looking essentially right down at the very top of Dragon. The nose cone you can kind of make out is open and swung up over to the very top part of the vehicle. So it's going to continue to approach, and if you're wondering what are all the different colored dots, those are actually dead pixels on the camera. The sensors are essentially exposed to the radiation environment of space without any of the shielding that we have protecting stuff inside the station. So as they take radiation hits over time, those pixels can die and degrade in the sensors. And so that's why we've got kind of the Christmas lights going on as it's dark, so they're a lot easier to spot. But Dragon continuing to close in. We're under 2 kilometers away in just about 2.5 minutes to that mid-course burn. And then again, that's going to send us up to waypoint 0, which will be just 400 meters below the station. And we're not going to pause there. Everything continues to look good. They'll do a final go, no-go to move past that within the next couple of minutes. So usually about 10 minutes before we hit waypoint 0, we'll get the go, no-go to move beyond it and approach waypoint 1. Waypoint 1, since we're going to the forward port, as you can see on this diagram, just 220 meters directly in front of station. That keeps us still outside of that keep-out sphere. And then after Dragon, again, gets the go before we get there to proceed, it'll hit waypoint 1 and immediately start approaching the station. Waypoint 2, we traditionally will pause, but again, there is the option to proceed past waypoint 2 if everything continues to look great on both the Dragon and the station system side, and then bring Dragon in for an ultimate docking. Right before docking, we'll hear a couple of things. One that you'll hear just moments before, usually about 25 seconds or so before the docking, you'll hear the call out for CHOP. That's crew hands-off point. That's essentially just giving the crew a heads up not to send any abort commands to Dragon at that point, as anything, once you're that close in, just has to be handled automatically by the vehicle itself. Once Dragon contacts that international docking adapter, we will start the the docking process. So Dragon has a capture ring mechanism on the very top of it, and that's what's going to make that initial contact and then draw it in close to the docking adapter itself. And then a couple of different steps have to happen before we have docking complete and essentially a hard mate, as we call it. There are 12 hooks on Dragon's docking system that engage into slots in the international docking adapter itself, and that's what helps get us that hard connection into the docking adapter and effectively creates a sealed environment between the Dragon side and the station side that creates something called the vestibule that we'll have to pressurize before we get hatches open and things like that. And Dragon will also deploy some umbilicals to get both the power and data, and we can see the thrusters lighting up. We just executed that mid-course burn, so that is underway right now.
We'll need to do it in the later slot when we have support from the team here on the ground to watch the photo.
And hearing confirmation, we got a good mid-course maneuver, so Dragon just converging on waypoint 0. We're about 20 minutes away until it reaches that. It'll be just 400 meters below the space station. You're seeing kind of the occasional bursts. Those are coming from the Draco thrusters on board the Dragon spacecraft. There's 16 Dracos that it's going to be using throughout its flight on orbit. This version of Dragon does not have Super Dracos. Those are only used in aborts on the crewed version of the Dragon spacecraft, but there are 16 Draco thrusters. Each one provides about 90 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space. There are 4 on the forward bulkhead, which is what's looking directly at us, essentially. And then there are 12 around the surface section of the capsule, so not on the trunk part where there are solar arrays and a radiator, but still on the capsule portion on the lower part of it. And they're in 4 different clusters of 3 thrusters. And those are what we're going to see being used for all of these maneuvers. So those are just automatically firing to maintain Dragon's pointing its attitude towards station, as there's a couple of pretty critical navigation items that we're going to be using for this approach. Again, Dragon flying itself autonomously. It's got a couple of different tools at its command to help simply tell it where it is, talk to station, find out where station is as we do this final approach. Some of the primary ones are GPS units. Dragon has both absolute GPS units, which are the spacecraft communicating with GPS satellites to give itself its position in space, and then what's known as RGPS, or relative GPS. And so those are navigation sensors and antennas on Dragon that are talking directly to essentially a similar system on board the space station. And so the 2 vehicles are able to use their own GPS data to talk to each other, and that helps really fine-tune where they are in relation to each other and telling Dragon's flight computer essentially where it needs to go. Once we get in close, though, we'll switch over to using systems like the Dragon Eye, which is located at the very top and uses LiDAR sensor, essentially laser range-finding sensors to ping off of different reflectors on the space station itself, and that's where it's getting really high-fidelity, real-time data on just distance, rate of closure, and just essentially what part of station it's looking at and where it needs to line up for the docking targets, and so that's what we'll be using to help guide that final approach in.
Steve's all over it. Thanks, Nicole.
It sounds like you were reading their minds. Thanks for making sure it got done.
So at this moment in time, we're about a minute away until Dragon crosses inside of that approach ellipsoid. Once we hit there, we'll be inside of 1 kilometer in distance. And we're still about 16.5 minutes away from hitting waypoint 0, just about 400 meters below the space station, but everything continuing to go smoothly so far this morning. Again, we're about 20 minutes ahead on the timeline so far, so docking should be just about 53 minutes from now. That'll continue to get tweaked as Dragon either holds or just proceeds right through these different waypoints, but that'll put our docking time at about 6:28 a.m. Central Time.
Station Munich on Space Ground 2 for Steve. At your convenience. And Steve, first of all, thank you so much for all the work you did today on Immunity Assay, and I should say actually this week. And second thing, we have a remaining Cubic 6 activity this afternoon, and we would like to offer you to either do it today or we can replan it for tomorrow. And this is just to make sure that you can get some free time for the ISS crew orientation.
I'll get to it today. I'll do the restow here after we get SpaceX docked, and then I'll be able to schedule that this afternoon.
Perfect. Then we'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Station Houston on 2. Dragon range has passed through 1,000 meters. Please monitor long-range approach steps per steps 1 to 4 in 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copies. Good work.
And just now you heard the Capcom here, Mission Control Houston, Nicole Lewis, who was recently selected to be a flight director and is currently serving as a Capcom as well. The first time we've had somebody actively training to be certified as a flight director also serve as a Capcom. She just gave a heads up to NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg on board. The Dragon is inside of that 1,000 meters again. So we are inside of the approach ellipsoid. We're actually about 870 meters away in range right now, continuing to close in on waypoint 0, coming up in about 13 minutes and 45 seconds. She was giving him a call to essentially start going through a couple of steps. The crew has procedures on board that it's anytime you hear them call out a number, in this case it was 1.102, that's their rendezvous and approach monitoring. And again, Woody Hoberg has different displays and tools set up, so he's able to monitor Dragon's telemetry in real time and send commands to the vehicle if required. So he's just watching as it continues to fly in. He'll be confirming when they've got a good visual on Dragon, looking at the spacecraft once it arrives on that docking axis. So again, that'll be once we're past waypoint 0 and up on waypoint 1, just making sure that everything looks good and aligned, and then really just monitoring the flight computer's vehicle state and what the range is as it continues to fly in. And again, he's doing all of this. There are no people on this Dragon able to take control, so the crew acts as an additional person in the loop to send commands to the spacecraft if required, if we need to tell it to abort or to hold at any point, either with an issue with Dragon or if we have any issues on the station side. And there's several steps that happen on the station side just to get ready for a Dragon spacecraft. The different console positions here in Mission Control Houston responsible for essentially commanding and flying the space station, and they're doing everything from configuring solar arrays to be in a specific orientation just to make sure they're not getting any excess plumes from Dragon's thrusters as it flies in, and then the ADCO position here in Mission Control Houston has some very specific steps to take with attitude control. So once we get into the docking part of today's mission will be entirely controlled on the U.S. side. So we use 4 large gyroscopes, essentially called CMGs, or control moment gyros. Those are what are spinning at an extremely fast rate, and we use those to actually help maintain and control the attitude of stations. So which way it's pointing, really. And our 2 primary means of control are...
We see pry range decreasing through 700 meters. Attitude looks good. Dragon is pointed at station.
Copy all. Sounds good.
So Woody Hoberg giving a quick all down. So primary range, less than 700 meters. Attitude, as he described, pretty self-explanatory. Dragon is pointing. We're looking straight at the nose cone of Dragon right now. Right down towards the top of it. So it's pointing at the space station itself, and it's going to continue to maintain this attitude even as it swings up and out in front, as again you're using some navigation sensors located at the very top part of Dragon to essentially do we're essentially bouncing lasers off the space station back and forth between Dragon to give it a lot of very valuable real-time data, like just how far away it is, that's your range, and then how quickly it's either flying towards or away from the space station, that's your range rate. So you're going to constantly hear a call out of range, all of the sensors giving that data out in meters, and a range rate, and that's going to be given in meters per second. And since we're approaching, that shows up as essentially a negative value for everyone in our telemetry. But that's just telling you how quickly Dragon is closing in, and that's a relative velocity. Is both Dragon and station traveling relative to the Earth more than 17,000 miles an hour, but the relative velocity between the two will be fairly slow. Once we hit that final approach and docking, we'll be moving typically around or just a little bit below 1/10 of a meter per second. So it's going to be pretty slow and methodical crawl once we're up on the docking axis towards that docking itself, which should be coming in about 46 minutes from now. But next major milestone is going to be hitting waypoint 0, 400 meters below the station, and we are just at 9 minutes away from that expected time.
Houston Station on 2 for Dragon docking monitor.
Go ahead on 2.
Hey Nicole, we're showing no video right now. Can you just confirm that's expected?
And yep, we can confirm that is expected. We are waiting until we switch the data rate, and then we'll be able to get that video.
Okay, station copies, thanks.
And again, a quick exchange between Woody Hoberg, who's prime for monitoring Dragon's approach from on board the space station, and the Capcom down here in Houston, Nicole Lewis. He was referring to no video. He's talking about getting video feed from Dragon itself as it approaches. And the team here in Mission Control Houston confirming that that's expected, and we'll get that once we essentially switch to a higher data rate in our connection between station and Dragon. Once Dragon gets this close, we're essentially communicating with it on something called C2V2. That's Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. That's a common control scheme that we use across a fleet of different spacecraft that now fly to the space station. and dock to the US OS side, so all of the docking ports on either node 2 or the berthing ports on node 2 and node 1. And that allows us to essentially transfer data back and forth between the two spacecraft, and also use the space station's downlink system through the TDRS satellites to also get video not only to the crew on board station, but that serves as an additional command path to get Dragon data down here to the teams. Once Dragon is docked to the space station, it'll essentially switch off all of its transmitting antennas and move to using station systems. That'll happen once we get docked and get umbilicals deployed. Those will start to provide power and data to Dragon using those station systems. So Dragon has its own solar arrays, its own batteries on board that it's able to charge and power all of its systems throughout free flight. But while it's docked and goes into what's known as a quiescent mode, we're able to essentially power down those different systems and just plug Dragon into the station's much larger ones. So it'll essentially become an integrated piece of the space station while it's docked, able to draw from those large solar arrays to power its systems on board, a lot of which get powered down once we are docked, but also, again, be able to use the station's different data downlink systems to continue to feed telemetry from Dragon down to the ground. We also integrate the cabin atmosphere of Dragon with the rest of the station stack itself, so it essentially becomes almost like another module for the time while it's docked. They'll install ducting just to make sure we have just an active feed of that atmosphere, as any time you're operating in a microgravity environment, you don't have that natural convection, so we have basically active air handlers just pushing air through the station to make sure you have that circulation. That's so you're able to constantly scrub carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, make sure you're distributing oxygen, things of that nature. So the crew will, once they get the hatches open, initiate a lot of that work, and then it's going to be pretty much immediately cargo unload duties for the crew. And so as of this moment, we're about 450 meters Dragon away from the space station, expecting to be at waypoint 0 in less than 4 minutes. After we pass through waypoint 0, Dragon will start to swing up, out, and out in front of the space station until it hits a point just about 220 meters. And we'll again stay outside of that keep out sphere. We're already inside the approach ellipsoid. And then the team will do a go-no-go to proceed past waypoint 1 onto waypoint 2 before we even get to waypoint 1. As again, the expectation is we'll be able to move through each of these waypoints without holding, as long as everything continues to look good on Dragon and on the station side. And we're just continuing to hear some updates that everything's still looking good with Dragon. Again, it's primarily navigating right now using those Dragon Eye systems, which rely on a couple of different sensors. One of them LiDAR, a laser range finding, essentially bouncing a laser off different reflectors on board the station to give immediate real-time data to the flight computer of just distance away from station, and also that range rate. Again, we're constantly looking at just how far and how quickly it's approaching, to make sure we're following the expected flight path. We're going to hit waypoint 0 in a little less than 2.5 minutes, and then start to swing up to waypoint 1. Everything continuing to run about 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Originally, we were looking at a docking at about 6:52 a.m. Central Time, but we're now looking at that just 40 minutes or so from now, at about 6:28 a.m. Central. So we could hit there sooner, but everything continuing to run pretty smoothly so far with the approach and docking. We are coming up less than 2 minutes away from waypoint 0, and then Dragon will be ready to move on to waypoint 1. We'll see it swing up in front of the space station. And we are less than a minute away from waypoint 0.
2 for MHU.
And go ahead on 2.
Hey, Tommy, looking for your go on step 10.1 for MH unit removal. Step, 10.1.
Yes, Frank, you are go at step 10.1 and still can meet you on Space Ground 3.
Great, thanks so much.
And should be just about 10 seconds away until we pass waypoint 0. It was NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, who's off working on a couple of different science items. He will join Woody Hoberg and Steve Bowen, as well as Sultan Al-Niadi, with some cargo transfer operations with Dragon a little bit later in the day. And confirmation, we have moved past waypoint 0. Next up is going to be waypoint 1, so we're going to see Dragon now start to not only get closer, but start to swing up and out in front of the space station itself. The crew's going to continue to monitor throughout this process. They're just still making sure that Dragon essentially keeps a range outside of that keep out sphere. Really, they don't want to see it approaching closer than a little less than 200 meters away, but it's going to stop at a point directly in front of the station at about 220 meters, so we're still maintaining that distance outside of the keep out sphere. So you've got teams here in Houston watching the systems on board Dragon. You've got the primary Dragon team out at MCCX and Hawthorne controlling the systems, but again, Dragon largely flying itself. And then we have Woody Hoberg as prime on board the station, monitoring Dragon during its final approach. But we're already a little less than 400 meters away, and Dragon's already starting to move up to waypoint 1. In about 12 minutes or so, we'll get the go-no-goes between the joint NASA.
2, we see range inside 400 meters. Vehicle mode is transition to docking axis, and attitude is as expected.
Copy all. That's great news. Thanks.
Woody Hoberg just reporting again. Dragon spacecraft a little less than 400 meters away now from the space station, moving up to the docking axis, so that's going to line it up, not perfectly, but essentially right in front of its expected docking port. And since we're going to the forward port, that's going to be directly in front of the space station itself. And then attitude, just talking about which way Dragon's pointing. And again, we're going to be essentially expecting it to point nose forward directly at station for the remainder of this flight, as that's where your primary navigation cluster is located. And so that's going to continue to point at Dragon, or at station, even as it begins to swing up and out in front. And then obviously pointed that direction once we get into the final docking is the docking ring, and all of the capture mechanisms are at that very top part of Dragon. And this is Mission Control Houston. Everything continuing to go smoothly with Dragon's approach to the International Space Station. We're a little less than 20 minutes, about 19 and a half minutes away from the expected arrival at waypoint number 1. And that'll put us just about 220 meters directly in front of the station on what's known as the docking axis. So again, if you were to simply draw an imaginary line straight through the middle of the space station with the docking port on the forward end of node 1, that's where we are headed. And so it'll get to waypoint 1 in a little less than 10 minutes. The teams are going to do a joint go, no-go to essentially proceed beyond waypoint 1 and on to waypoint 2, which is our final waypoint before we actually get into docking. And that will be inside of that keep-out sphere and is a position about 20 meters in front. So expectation is everything continues to look good on Dragon and on station as we'll move right past waypoint 1 and on to waypoint 2. And then even once we get to waypoint 2, we might only have a short pause before we proceed in for that final approach and docking. Again, Dragon's going to continue to fly itself autonomously. You've got a couple of different teams and individuals in the loop monitoring and able to send commands to the vehicle on board the station. We've got NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg, who's been radioing down some different performance calls to the teams, but again, everything we've heard so far is everything looking as expected. Dragon right now a little over 330 meters away from the station. We're expecting it to close in to about 220. Some of the primary stuff that Woody and the different teams on the ground are looking for is just Dragon maintaining the appropriate distance away from station, and as it continues this very gradual swing up to the docking axis. During that final approach, we'll see it start to close in on the forward port of Node 2, the Harmony module, where we have one of our 2 international docking adapters. This will be taking the port that was just vacated by the Crew 5 mission on board Dragon Endurance when they came back just last weekend. And this Dragon for the 27th resupply mission for SpaceX expected to stay docked for about 30 days, during which the crew members on board of Expedition 68 will be unloading the approximately 6,000 pounds of cargo that's flying up for them. There's also a payload in Dragon's trunk that's going to be removed and attached to station robotically that has a suite of different research projects on board. Some of the experiments will come off, and then they'll immediately have to essentially install, execute, and then load back onto Dragon before it comes home later on in April. Dragon, in addition to being in the fleet of cargo vehicles delivering cargo, is really the primary means we have, the only means that we have to deliver large amounts of cargo back down to Earth. And so we're able to essentially bring a lot of those different research experiments back home for then further analysis on the ground. We don't do a lot of the actual analysis, or very little of the analysis to get results from the hundreds of experiments taking place on station. It doesn't happen on station. We need to get it back down to the different scientist labs back down here on planet Earth and Dragon, that critical pipeline right now to get that research back down. Also have the ability to return different hardware to the ground. So we've brought things like spacesuits back in the past for analysis and refurbishment before eventually flying them back up on Dragon. There is one, it's called an SEMU. It stands for short EMU. It's essentially the acronym that we use for the primary part of a spacewalking spacesuit, that extravehicular mobility unit. One of those is packed away on Dragon that's going to be delivered for use on future spacewalks, which should be picking up a little bit later in the summer as we continue to essentially outfit the station and prepare to go through the final stages of installing new solar arrays, with that final pair expected to fly a little bit later this year, potentially as early as this summer. But just checking in on the ops right now, we're about 5 minutes away from our teams here in Houston and out at Hawthorne doing their joint go-no-goes to proceed beyond waypoint 1, at which point we'll be able to move into waypoint 2. We're a little less than 15 minutes away. So Dragon right now is moving from a position beneath the station to right out in front of it. And we're going to see it essentially staring the station down. And pretty soon, we're also going to be switching to a higher data rate of communications between Dragon and the station using that common communication for visiting vehicles, that C2V2 system, and that's what's going to start to deliver live views from the Dragon camera, both to the crew on board, and then should be delivering that down to us here on the ground, and we'll be able to show you the view from Dragon as it starts to approach. Right now we are in a quick handover, so essentially the satellites that the station uses to communicate with all the teams down here on the ground, the TDRS, the tracking data, and relay satellites. That's how we get all of our telemetry, our data, everything down here on the ground. We'll be getting that shortly. Right now, though, you're looking at Marcos Flores. He's the flight director leading the Orbit 1 team in the room here in Houston. And he's leading those joint go-no-goes between us and SpaceX as we get through the final approaches of Dragon. And just above him at the Capcom position is Nicole Lewis, so she's the voice you're going to be hearing talking back and forth with Woody Hoberg and the other crew members on board the space station right now. But it looks like we're already getting back those views. So the space station right now in that orbital daytime. So now this is a camera view from the top part of station, essentially looking out into the front, and you can see Dragon start to slowly make its way up. It's going to eventually be pretty much right in front of the space station, looking dead on the docking axis towards that front port of Node 2. So it's doing this pretty slowly. It's not really increasing its proximity to the space station. It's not really getting any closer at this point. We'll get about 100 meters closer or so over the next 12 minutes, but primarily just doing that translational maneuver to move up and out in front to the docking axis. And we expect it to be there in about 12.5 minutes, and then we'll swing right through waypoint 1 and onto waypoint 2, which will bring us just 20 meters away from the station and get us ready for that final docking. And everything continuing to run about 20 minutes ahead of schedule. We are expecting docking about 25 minutes from now, so it should be happening at about 6:28 a.m. Central Time. We'll get an exact docking time, though, once Dragon makes that initial contact with the forward port on Node 2. All right, so we're about 8.5 minutes away from Dragon heading waypoint 1. Again, that spot just about 220 meters ahead of the station. It's about 300 meters away.
Station on 2, range is 318 meters, vehicle mode, transition to docking access, attitude remains as expected.
Copy all. We're configuring for 6 meg now, so should see video soon.
Excellent, we'll be watching.
And you heard a call out from Woody Hoberg again. He's on board the station monitoring Dragon as it continues to swing up. As both Dragon and the station about to make a pass right over the central part of the Indian Ocean. Dragon just about 7 minutes, 45 seconds away from waypoint 1. It's going to continue until it's just 220 meters approximately straight in front of the space station, and then begin to proceed on to waypoint 2, just about 20 meters in front of the station. We also heard a call out of stepping up to a 6 meg, so that's just talking the speed at the data connection between Dragon and the space station itself, and that's going to allow us to start to bring video from Dragon itself both into the station for the crew to monitor, but then also hopefully down to us here on the ground. So we'll see, in addition to these different views from the space station itself of Dragon's approach, we'll see some views of Dragon looking back at the station. Again, the primary mode of navigation right now is using those Dragon eyes, so using LiDARs for Dragon to essentially get real-time range and range rate information, just telling it how far away it is from the station.
Station Houston on 2. Houston and station are go for Dragon to approach to 20 meters.
Station copies.
And so as promised, now getting views from a centerline camera on Dragon itself, looking back at the station. Again, we're going to be lining up just on the docking axis, about 220 meters away from the docking port on the forward end of Node 2. We'll be getting there in about 5 minutes. And we just heard the Capcom Nicole Lewis call up to the crew that everybody here in Houston, the joint teams have given the go to proceed into 20 meters. So that'll be, and that's the final waypoint that we hit before we actually hit docking. Now, typically we'll pause at waypoint 2. It can be a very short pause, or if we have to work any issues, we can hang out at waypoint 2 for an extended period of time before Dragon moves in for that final approach and docking. I'm not tracking any issues on the vehicle, though. No issues on the station side, so everything continuing to move about 20 minutes ahead of the timeline. Expected to be just a little over 17 minutes away from docking. We're still targeting right around 6:28 a.m. Central Time, but we'll get you an exact point once we make that initial contact and capture. So in a little over 4 minutes, Dragon's going to hit waypoint 1, and it'll be 220 meters away from the space station itself. And we've already given, the joint teams have given their go, and Dragon will proceed immediately through waypoint 1 and begin approaching the docking port. And it's going to, again, hit waypoint 2, so it'll be just 20 meters away. Waypoint 2 is when we do our final alignment with the docking port. So we'll be essentially in a specified range of that docking port once we hit waypoint 1, but we don't worry about doing the real fine tuning of that approach until we're only about 20 meters away. That way you're not kind of burning excess prop that you don't have to, since you're going to be needing to do that final approach anyway. The crew on board has essentially a corridor, so they'll have, and this is a view of what Woody Hoberg's able to see. This is an overlay that he has on a laptop on board the space station using that centerline video and getting a couple of different data points. One of the things to pay attention to at the very top, you can see getting from those primary sensors the range and the range rate. Again, that's telling you how far away Dragon is and how quickly it's approaching. But we are just about 3 minutes away from waypoint 1, after which we're going to start seeing Dragon just fly closer. So we're going to cross that keep out sphere area and start to approach until we're just 20 meters away. And then just before we get to waypoint 2, which is that 20 meter away area, the teams will do kind of their final go, no go for docking, where we're essentially saying everything continues to look good on Dragon, everything's ready on station for the vehicles to dock, and then Dragon's going to autonomously fly itself in. We'll do the final alignment with the docking port once we hit waypoint 2, and then Dragon will start to slowly approach. It's going to be moving at about 1/10 of a meter per second, maybe a little bit less, as it closes in those final 20 meters. Just a little before, about 25 seconds before, we'll hear the Capcom call up CHOP. That stands for crew hands off point. That's just telling the crew not to send any commands at that point. In that very final couple of feet or meters before Dragon docks, any aborts at that point have to be commanded autonomously by the vehicle itself. But Dragon's going to fly in. It's going to make that initial contact and capture. So Dragon has a docking ring that's extended. It's going to essentially hit the pedals. Really, there are 3 pedals on the docking port itself that the capture ring will essentially interact with, and it's almost like 2 hands grasping each other to get that initial capture, and then that docking ring will start to retract, and that'll bring Dragon a little bit closer in, and that'll allow it to then engage a series of hooks. There are 12 hooks, 2 yanks, that will engage to essentially do a hard mate, and once those are engaged, you essentially have a vacuum tight seal between Dragon and station. You have an area that right now is exposed to vacuum on both vehicles, but will be sealed away from the spaceflight environment itself, and that will be called the vestibule, and that's the area that the crew will pressurize. They'll actually just open a valve on the station side that will start to flow some atmosphere into that area, and we'll do a couple of pauses throughout that. They'll do leak checks to make sure no leaks on the Dragon side or the station side, eventually bringing that up to essentially the same pressure you have on board station at Dragon, about 14.7 psi, before we start to get the hatches open and cargo to come out. But for now, we are just about 20 seconds away from waypoint 1. We'll stand by, wait for confirmation that we've passed through that. We're a little over 225 meters away. So again, expecting about 220 to be our final distance before we pass through waypoint 1, coming up shortly.
Houston Station on 2, vehicle mode is approach to align point. Range continues decreasing, attitude as expected.
Copy all.
And that call from Woody Hoberg in confirmation by teams here in Mission Control Houston Dragon has passed waypoint 1. And so it's now closing in. We're about to pass inside of that keep out sphere. So Dragon already just about to cross that 200 meter threshold, as it's now continuing on to waypoint 2. And that's a spot just 20 meters away from the docking port, where again we'll be able to do a final pause, do a final alignment, and then move through that pretty quickly, as we're continuing to track no issues on the Dragon side, no issues on the station side, and everything continuing to run ahead of schedule. So as long as we continue to move through pretty quickly, we're expecting the docking to happen in just about 11 minutes from now, at about 6:28 a.m. Central Time. Before we get there, we'll have to pass through waypoint 2, which is coming up in about 9.5 minutes. So at that point, we'll be, again, just 20 meters away, and we'll be doing that final alignment with the docking port. During this approach, Dragon not trying to stay perfectly lined up with the station. It essentially has a range that the crew's watching, and there's kind of a cone that gets drawn out where we want to make sure Dragon's staying inside of that cone before it hits that final waypoint 2 and we do the final alignment. The teams here in Houston and out at MCCX are going to do a kind of a final go, no go in a little less than 7 minutes. That'll be the last one we do, essentially giving the authority to proceed with docking. So that'll come up shortly, just about 2 minutes before we actually hit waypoint 2, and then we'll look to move through waypoint 2 and then into the final steps of approach and docking. Again, we're heading into the forward port of Node 2, the Harmony module, where it's going to be hitting, and Dragon is going to be staying docked for about a month, delivering more than 6,000 pounds of supplies, hardware to the Expedition 68 crew. Some of that external in Dragon's trunk that's going to be removed robotically, but a lot of that packed into the pressurized section of Dragon, both in including supplies, just general provisions for the crew. There's some fresh food items for them, as these cargo deliveries really the only access they get to a lot of fresh food. So definitely something the crew members look forward to, but more than anything, this kicks off just a really intense period of activity for the astronauts, as once Dragon docks, a timer is essentially started where a lot of the experiments on board have to be brought off, executed, and loaded back on before Dragon comes back a month from now. But continuing just a quick ops check-in, we're about 5.5 minutes away from our final go-no-go here in Houston, and then we should hit waypoint 2 in about 7.5 minutes. Still expecting docking about 20 minutes ahead of schedule at about 6:28 a.m. Central Time, but we'll get you an exact time once we make that initial contact and capture.
Station Houston on 2, want to confirm that you have reviewed steps 5 and 6 and are ready for docking?
Nicole, great timing. You read our minds. We just finished our review and crew is ready for docking.
Awesome, happy to hear it. And also just want to confirm you've got a third crew member to monitor those SM advisories.
Yep, we'll take care of that, Nicole, and we've got advisories on the PCS.
Copy that.
So right now, Dragon less than 100 meters away. We're a little inside 2 minutes from that final go, no go. We should be hitting waypoint 2 in about 3 minutes, 40 seconds from now. Then expected docking just 5 minutes away. So Dragon definitely getting in close. You're seeing it really come into view. Just some of the different items that you're looking at. So you're looking at the very top. The nose cone of Dragon obviously opened and off to the lower right of the spacecraft. Those 4 holes you're seeing, those are where the forward bulkhead thrusters are located. And then we can't see them because of the exposure, but your primary navigation elements are in that, essentially that nose ring, including the LiDAR. So there's a better view. You can see those smaller holes in the top left part. Those are where a lot of your really sensitive navigation pieces of equipment are, including the Dragon eyes, which are using laser rangefinders to help Dragon navigate its final approach. We're not using those forward bulkhead thrusters for any of these final approach maneuvers. We're using the clusters of Dracos around the base of the capsule itself, and so you'll occasionally see those fire.
Station Houston on 2 for situational awareness at waypoint 2. Dragon will briefly pause to align for docking and then automatically resume approach.
Station copies. Thanks for that awareness.
Capcom Nicole Lewis giving Woody Hoberg on board the station a quick heads up. So the Mission Control Houston team has reported they are go for final approach and docking. And so we're less than 2 minutes away. Dragon will hit that waypoint number 2, and it'll be just 20 meters away. It's going to pause just to do a final alignment. Again, we're not doing a final alignment with that docking port until we get this close in. Just again, otherwise you'd essentially be doing it the whole way in addition to approaching. So just the easiest way to conserve on propellant is saving it until you're essentially in much closer to the station itself. So in a little over a minute, Dragon will pause about 20 meters away, and it'll do its final alignment, and then it's going to automatically begin approaching the station. So docking should be coming up in just a couple of minutes. We could be inside 3 minutes away from docking. We'll get you that exact time once we make that initial contact with the docking port on the forward end of node 2. And we see Dragon start to slow down as it hits waypoint 2. And we're going to see it pause here. You're going to see thruster firings pick up a little bit as it hits this pause point, and it'll enter into its final alignment to really line up with the docking port itself. And confirmation we're holding at waypoint 2. So Dragon now going to maneuver itself slightly just to line up with that docking port, and then it's going to it's going to automatically start to approach. And so we can see through the centerline camera, it's going to line itself up. We're looking right at the business end of the international docking adapter on the forward port of node 2. And in just a couple of seconds, once Dragon's finished lining itself up, we're going to see that range rate start to tick up again, and we're going to see it start to approach.
Houston on 2, mode is approach to docking port, range is inside 20 meters and decreasing, attitude as expected.
Copy all. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor for steps 5 and 6 in 1.102.
We copy, cruise and step past.
All right, so Dragon past waypoint 2, it's in its final approach. So we are inside 20 meters. We're actually inside 17 already at this point. So just a couple of minutes away now from docking. We'll see those thrusters continue to fire just as Dragon maintains that precise alignment. Just again, about 25 seconds or so beforehand, we'll hear the call out for chop, crew hands off point. Just again, giving the notification to the crew that we're close enough that they should not be sending abort commands, as it would just be needed to handle, or it would need to be handled by the vehicle itself. So should be seeing docking in just a few minutes, potentially in about 3 minutes from now. But we'll continue to stand by and give you an exact time once Dragon makes contact with the International Space Station. Dragon inside of 10 meters away. So we should
10 meters, all errors less than half a degree.
Copy all.
Woody Hoberg confirming less than 10 meters away and talking the error bands all green. So that's essentially just meaning Dragon continues to be well in control of itself and in good alignment as it approaches this docking port. Expecting docking in about 90 seconds. Five meters to go.
Crew hands off point.
Copy, crew hands off.
Crew is hands off. We are less than 2 meters away.
Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
And capture confirmed at 6:31 a.m. Central Time, 7:31 a.m. Eastern, while Dragon and Station flew 261 statute miles over northeastern China. The vehicle's linking up right as the station was flying over the border between China and Russia. But again, that time, 6:31 a.m. Central, 7:31 a.m. Eastern, docking 261 statute miles over northeastern China. So that's that initial contact and capture. Now the docking sequence will continue. So the docking ring is going to start
retraction in progress.
And getting the confirmation there that the ring retraction has started. So this is going to start bringing the vehicle in a little bit closer, bit by bit, until it's essentially locked up with the docking adapter itself, and that will allow us to start engaging the hard capture system. So that's done through a series of 12 hooks, done 6 by 6, and that's what's going to firmly hold Dragon in place and essentially pull us in enough so we have an airtight seal between the Dragon and the station side, creating what's known as the vestibule, that space between the Dragon hatch and the hatch on the station side, known as the A-pass hatch. And so once that's completed, we'll also deploy 2 umbilicals that are going to connect Dragon's data and power systems into station and allow it to start just feeding off station systems while it's docked to the orbiting lab, and that will complete our docking sequence. That all takes about 12 to 13 minutes or so following that initial capture, but right now we're just waiting for the docking ring to finish retracting, and then we'll start getting ready to deploy those hooks. But again, if you missed it, the docking happening at 6:31 a.m. Central Time, 7:31 a.m. Eastern, with Dragon at station flying 261 statute miles over northeastern China. So with that, we now have 2 Dragons again docked to the space station. It's going to be like this for the next month. In total, 6 different vehicles currently attached to the station now, with 1 Soyuz and 1 Progress, or rather 2 Soyuz and 1 Progress over on the Russian segment. Cygnus's 18th commercial resupply mission still docked to the Earth-facing port on Node 1, and then both a crew and a cargo version of Dragon. So a couple of minutes now until we get these hooks in place and the docking sequence will be completed. But everything completed right as expected, actually getting a little bit ahead of the timeline, docking a little less than 20 minutes before we were originally anticipating, but a flawless flight uphill and docking for this Dragon on the 27th resupply mission for SpaceX. So again, right now the docking ring in the mechanism onboard Dragon still retracting. Once that's completed, we'll get ready to start engaging the hooks. There's 12 of them that are going to engage to secure Dragon to the international docking adapter. And so we're gonna see those get deployed in 2 different sets. First set of 6 will engage, and then the second set of 6 will, after that first set is already locked in, and then we'll have 12 hooks securing Dragon to the station itself. So again, if you're just now tuning in, you missed the exciting part.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Station copies.
You missed the exciting part, but Dragon already made that initial contact and capture. Now we're waiting for the docking sequence to be completed. So the docking ring has retracted, and now MCCX, the flight controllers, out at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne.
And MCS is configured. Proceeding with hook driving.
in the call from the Capcom right there, the MCS being configured, that's the motion control system on board the station. Essentially, we just need to make sure that means we use to control the attitude on station or in their proper configuration. For hook driving, it's really to make sure that the thrusters on the Russian segment are disabled, as any inadvertent firing of those thrusters could potentially interrupt or cause issues with the ring deploy during Dragon. So just getting stationed in the right configuration, and with the MCS, the motion control system, now configured, we'll start to see those rings deploy. Again, six in the first set, 6 in the second, and the Dragon will be attached to the station. And getting confirmation that the first set of hooks are traveling. So 6 hooks driving now. It'll take a couple of minutes, and then once they're in place, the next set of 6 hooks will drive, and then we'll have Dragon secured. It'll have a couple of other steps, deploying 2 umbilicals before we are essentially fully done with the docking sequence. But once these hooks are in place, Dragon will be securely mated to the station. And meanwhile, on board the station, so NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg was monitoring throughout all of this final approach. He's going to start to tear down some of the tools that he used, the laptops that he used to monitor Dragon during its final approach, and then is going to get ready to do everything on the station side to get Dragon ready for ingress, for the crew to actually start moving in. One of the major things that has to happen is going to be pressurizing the vestibule, so that's the space between the Dragon and the station hatches. Previously, that was just exposed to vacuum. Still a vacuum environment in there right now, as we're just essentially creating a sealed environment right now, though. And then Woody Hoberg will be able to open a valve on the station side to slowly flow some atmosphere from the station stack into that vestibule area. So we need to bring that up to the same atmospheric pressure as we have with the rest of the station and inside Dragon before we start opening up hatches. They'll typically pause at about halfway up to that appropriate pressure, which is 14.7 psi, just to do leak checks. As you're introducing atmosphere, you're changing not just the pressure inside, but thermal conditions, and as things heat up, your pressure can rise, so you want to make sure that the pressure readings you're getting are actually based off of how much volume of atmosphere is actually in there, and not just thermal changes. So they'll pause to essentially allow things to equalize for a few minutes, and then conduct leak checks both on the Dragon side and the station side, make sure we don't have any leaks in the vestibule before we begin feeding additional atmosphere through. And then once that's brought fully up to essentially the same pressure as the station stack, he'll be able to open the hatch on the station side, and then open up the hatch on the Dragon side. But right now, the hook process continuing. The first set of 6 have been engaged. The second set are driving and standing by for hard capture complete.
Hard capture complete.
All right, and with that,
Station copies. And Nicole, just let me know when I have your go for step 1 of the next procedure.
Copy that. We'll keep you posted.
and so with that call from Capcom here, Nicole Lewis and Mission Control Houston, hard capture is complete. All 12 hooks have engaged, firmly attaching SpaceX Dragon to the forward port on Node 2 and completing our docking process for today. So if you missed it, again, just to recap, Dragon docked successfully at 6:31 a.m. Central Time, 7:31 a.m. Eastern, while both Dragon and Station were flying 261 statute miles over the northeastern part of China, bringing the 27th resupply mission for SpaceX to the station. Woody Hoberg was on board monitoring Dragon, which moved through all of its different burns and checkpoints ahead of schedule, docking about 21 minutes earlier than expected per the pre-flight timeline. But with that, a lot of activity now kicking off for the crew. They're going to start pressurizing that vestibule, that space between Dragon and the space station itself, before they get ready to open up the hatches and begin cargo operations later today. Dragon's expected to stay docked for about 30 days, departing later on in April, where the crew is going to be repacking it full of cargo and science experiments to then get delivered back down here to the ground. But with Dragon successfully docked, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our coverage today. Thank you for following along with the final stages of Dragon's rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station, kicking off, again, another busy month, but another successful cargo delivery to the station itself. So we will go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much for joining. This is Mission Control Houston.